The Yamato had the largest guns ever mounted on a warship, 9 18.1-inch barrels. Each one could fire a 3,200-pound shell over 26 miles. Think about that for a second. Every single projectile stood taller than a grown man, weighed more than a compact car, was wider around than a telephone pole. When one of these shells hit something, it didn't just damage it, it obliterated it. The explosion could punch through 16 inches of hardened steel armor like it was cardboard, create a crater 30 feet deep, level an entire city block. These weren't just guns. They were mobile earthquakes, floating apocalypse machines. And in 4 years of war, from 1941 to 1945, these magnificent weapons sank exactly one escort carrier. Maybe. That kill is still disputed by historians. Let me tell you how the most powerful naval weapons ever built became the most expensive decoration in military history. Here's where the math gets brutal. The Yamato cost 137 million yen to build in 1940. That doesn't sound like much until you realize what else that money could have bought. 1,000 fighter aircraft. 1,000. Not dozens, not hundreds. 1,000 planes. Japan didn't just build one of these monsters, they built two. The Yamato and her sister ship, the Musashi. That's 2,000 fighters they didn't build. 2,000 aircraft that could have defended their aircraft carriers at Midway. Protected their cities from American bombers. Supported their armies fighting across the Pacific. Instead, they got two ships with guns so ridiculously powerful they turned out to be completely useless. Want to know what those guns actually accomplished? In the entire Pacific War, Yamato's main batteries fired at enemy surface ships exactly once, the 25th of October, 1944. The battle off Samar. The target was a group of American escort carriers, the small ones. Slow, vulnerable, so lightly armored that even destroyers could damage them. 360 shells launched from the most powerful guns in human history. Hits scored by the 18-inch guns, 0. Not one, not a single hit. A destroyer escort took some damage, sure, but that was from the secondary 6-inch batteries, not the main guns. The 18-inch monsters? They missed. Every single shot. The Americans escaped. All of them. Every single one of those massive shells cost more than a house in 1944 America. And every single one splashed harmlessly into the ocean. The American sailors who were there reported something incredible. Water columns 200 feet high shooting into the air. Terrifying, beautiful, spectacular. Also, consistently 300 yards away from their ships. The guns were too powerful to be useful, and I'm going to show you exactly why, using 7 different ways. The mathematics, physics, and strategic reality made these engineering marvels completely worthless. The numbers don't lie. And they're about to get worse. The 18-inch guns had a problem nobody anticipated during design. They were too powerful for their own ship. When Yamato fired a full 9-gun broadside, all guns at once, the blast overpressure was catastrophic. We're not talking about a little shaking. We're talking about total system failure across the entire vessel. Radio communication systems went dead instantly. The shockwave was so massive it shattered optical equipment used for targeting. The spotting aircraft mounted on the ship's catapults, destroyed by the blast from their own guns. Not damaged. Destroyed. Here's the part that sounds made up but isn't. Crew members suffered permanent hearing damage through steel bulkheads, multiple decks below where the guns fired. Imagine being inside a steel box, several floors underground, and still getting your eardrums blown out by weapons on the roof. The ship literally injured itself, firing its own weapons. But it gets worse. The fire control directors, the sophisticated systems that aimed these precision instruments, couldn't handle the violence. Each salvo knocked out the equipment needed to aim the next salvo. The massive guns created such brutal recoil and shaking that they disabled their own targeting systems. Think about that. You fire your weapon, and now you can't aim anymore. Engineers tried everything. Reinforced mountings, advanced shock absorption systems, Rubber padding, hydraulic dampers, nothing worked. The physics were simple and unavoidable. The guns produced more force than the ship could absorb without breaking itself. One survivor later testified about firing practice. After each drill, we spent more time repairing damage from our own guns than the enemy ever caused us in months of war. The maintenance crews were in a constant battle, replacing shattered instruments, recalibrating systems that had been knocked out of alignment, repairing structural damage caused by friendly fire. It was absurd. The fire control couldn't maintain accuracy after the first salvo. Every subsequent shot was firing blind, hoping the crews could manually recalibrate fast enough. In combat conditions, with the ship maneuvering and taking fire, it was hopeless. Here's the design paradox in one sentence. They built the guns for maximum power without considering whether the ship could handle sustained combat. Each shot made the next shot less accurate. A weapon system that defeats its own purpose with every trigger pull. Engineering triumph. Tactical disaster. And we haven't even gotten to the geometry problem yet. Maximum range on paper, 42,000 yards. That's 26 miles. Sounds devastating, right? Here's the problem nobody talks about in the specification sheets. The Earth is round. At 30,000 yards, targets disappeared below the horizon. The curvature of the planet made them invisible. Yamato couldn't see what it was theoretically shooting at. 12,000 yards of that impressive maximum range were physically impossible to use. No amount of Japanese engineering could defeat spherical geometry. But let's say the target was closer, within the visible range. Surely then these guns could dominate? Japanese optical rangefinders were the best in the world. Absolutely cutting-edge technology. In perfect conditions, they could track targets out to 27,000 yards. Perfect conditions meant clear weather, calm seas, stationary targets, perfect visibility. Basically, conditions that don't exist in combat. Real naval battles happen in chaos. Smoke pouring from gunfire obscures everything. Rain squalls roll in. Ships generate smoke screens deliberately. Everyone's maneuvering at full speed, twisting and turning. Visibility drops to nothing in seconds. In actual combat conditions, the effective targeting range collapsed to 18,000 yards. Half the gun's capability was unusable, just from weather and battlefield reality. Now let's talk about accuracy at ranges where Yamato could actually see the target. At 20,000 yards, well within visual range, the probability of hitting anything was 0.2% per shell. Read that again. Not 2%, 0.2%. That means Yamato needed to fire 500 shells to statistically achieve one hit at long range. 500 shells for one hit, maybe. Each barrel could fire 2 rounds per minute in perfect conditions. A full 9-gun broadside took 30 seconds to reload with perfect crew coordination, perfect mechanical function, and no battle damage. Do the math. To land one statistically probable hit required 45 minutes of continuous firing. No maneuvering allowed, because that throws off the targeting. No damage to the loading mechanisms. No mechanical failures. No incoming fire forcing the crew to take cover. 45 minutes of perfect conditions that never existed in any battle ever fought. At the battle off Samar, American destroyer captains reported something remarkable in their after-action reports. They could see the shells coming. These massive projectiles were actually visible in flight, arcing through the sky like meteors, and their ships at 25 knots could turn away from where the splashes landed. The fire control systems couldn't track fast-moving targets. The guns were designed in the 1,930 seconds to fight the kind of battleship duels that happened in World War I. Slow, ponderous ships trading blows at medium range. By 1944, that kind of naval warfare didn't exist anymore, but nobody told the Yamato. Let's talk about what kept these guns from ever reaching a battle in the first place. Fuel. At cruise speed, Yamato burned 300 tons of fuel oil per day. 300 tons. Just cruising along. Not even fighting. Just existing and moving. At combat speed, 600 tons per day. The ship's maximum range at full speed was 3,000 nautical miles. That's barely enough to get from Tokyo to Midway and back. Barely. No margin for combat maneuvering. No allowance for extended operations. No room for error. For context, American carriers could operate for weeks without refueling. Yamato could operate for days. By 1944, Japan's fuel situation wasn't just bad, it was catastrophic. American submarines were sinking Japanese tankers faster than they could be replaced. The oil imports from the Dutch East Indies, Japan's primary source, had completely stopped. The shipping lanes were death traps. The combined fleet was immobilized not by American firepower, but by fuel logistics. Yamato sat anchored at Truk, then Kure, then back to Truk, months at a time in port, not preparing for battle, not training, just sitting there, swinging at anchor, because there was no fuel to move her. The guns that could theoretically control the Pacific Ocean couldn't leave port because there was no oil to burn. Think about the insanity of this. You have the most powerful weapons ever mounted on a ship, weapons that cost as much as 1,000 aircraft, and they're just parked, rusting, useless. Here's another number that hurts. Each 9-gun salvo used as much steel as manufacturing one Zero fighter. Every time Yamato fired her main batteries, Japan lost an aircraft they desperately needed. Japan needed fighters to defend their carriers at Midway. They lost 4 carriers in one day because they didn't have enough fighters. Japan needed fighters to protect their cities from American B-29 bombers that were burning Tokyo to the ground. They needed fighters to support their armies getting slaughtered across the Pacific Islands. Instead, they were feeding steel to guns that couldn't hit anything and sat in port anyway. The Japanese Navy called this strategy fleet in being, preserving the decisive battle force, saving Yamato for the ultimate confrontation that would decide the war. That battle never came. The decisive naval engagement of World War II was fought at Midway by aircraft carriers. Yamato wasn't even there. Battleships had already become irrelevant, and nobody in the Japanese high command wanted to admit it. Let me show you the most damning statistic of all. Yamato was commissioned on the 16th of December, 1941, 9 days after Pearl Harbor. She was Japan's secret weapon, their ace in the hole, their guarantee of naval supremacy. She was sunk on the 7th of April, 1945. Total days in service, 1,207 days. Days spent in actual combat, 10. That's 0.8% of her service life. Less than 1%. The other 99.2% was spent hiding from American submarines, conserving fuel that didn't exist, or sitting in port, waiting for a decisive battle that never happened. The crew had a nickname for their ship. They called it Hotel Yamato. The ship had air conditioning. In 1942, air conditioning. The food was excellent by wartime standards. The quarters were comfortable. There were entertainment facilities, regular movie screenings. It was probably the cushiest posting in the entire Imperial Japanese Navy. Everything except one thing. Combat. The daily routine was mind-numbing. Polish the massive gun barrels until they gleamed. Maintain the complex loading mechanisms. Run endless drills loading and aiming at nothing. Practice for a battle that never came. Dream about actually using the weapons they'd spent years training on. One survivor recalled years later, "We knew the Americans called us the ghost ship because we never appeared in battle. It was humiliating. We had the most powerful weapons in the world, and we were hiding." The crew knew. They understood what was happening. They had the biggest guns ever built, and they were polishing them in port while the war was being lost around them. Then came October 1944, Leyte Gulf. Finally, after 3 years, Yamato was ordered to sortie. The crew was electric with excitement. Finally, they would prove what the ship could do. Finally, those magnificent guns would speak. The battle off Samar was their moment of truth. They fired at the vulnerable American escort carriers. Slow targets, lightly armored. Perfect conditions for the 18-inch guns to demonstrate their devastating power. They missed everything. 360 shells, 0 hits. The Americans escaped. Yamato retreated back to port. The one chance to justify 4 years of existence, and it was a complete failure. Crew morale didn't just drop. It collapsed. They'd finally gotten their battle, and they'd accomplished nothing. Meanwhile, American battleships with smaller 16-inch guns were winning battles. USS Washington sank the Japanese battleship Kirishima in 8 minutes at Guadalcanal. 8 minutes. USS Massachusetts destroyed the French battleship Jean Bart in harbor. American battleships provided crucial shore bombardment for every major invasion. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, the Philippines, the Marianas, every single one. Yamato's shore bombardment record. Once, accidentally, at Samar. While trying to hit carriers, some shells landed on the beach. They hit nothing of value. Hotel Yamato, excellent accommodations, great food. No combat effectiveness whatsoever. The crew knew the truth. They were aboard the most expensive floating hotel in military history, and the bill was about to come due. April 1945. Japan was losing. Everyone knew it. The Americans had taken Iwo Jima. They were invading Okinawa. B-29 bombers were turning Japanese cities into ash. The war was over in everything but the official announcement. That's when the Japanese High Command decided to send Yamato on one final mission. Operation Tengo, Heaven Number 1. The plan was simple, insane, and perfectly Japanese in its combination of honor and stupidity. Yamato would sail to Okinawa, beach itself on the shore, and become an unsinkable coastal artillery battery. The massive 18-inch guns would finally have the perfect use case. A stable firing platform, pre-surveyed targets, no need to hit moving ships, just bombard American positions until the ammunition ran out or the ship was destroyed. Finally, after 4 years, the guns would be used the way they were meant to be used. There was one small problem. Yamato would never reach Okinawa. The Japanese High Command knew this. They sent her anyway. The ship had fuel for a one-way trip. That's it. No fuel for the return journey, because there was no return journey. This wasn't a tactical decision. This was a propaganda gesture. A symbol. A statement that Japan would fight to the last ship. 3,000 men were being sent to die for symbolism. The anti-aircraft capabilities were laughable. Initially, Yamato had 24 5-inch guns that couldn't effectively track dive bombers. By 1945, in desperate modifications, they'd added 162 anti-aircraft guns of various sizes, different calibers, different firing systems. A patchwork of desperation. It didn't matter. The 7th of April 1945, 400 American aircraft attacked. Planes from 11 different carriers. More carriers attacking than Yamato had main gun barrels. Wave after wave of torpedo bombers and dive bombers. The 18-inch guns fired special anti-aircraft shells. Think about that. 3,200-pound projectiles designed to punch through battleship armor, now being fired into the air, hoping the blast radius would hit aircraft. It was like trying to swat flies with a sledgehammer. The battle lasted 2 hours. 11 torpedo hits. 6 bomb hits. Massive flooding on the port side. The ship began listing. 10 degrees. 20 degrees. 30 degrees. The crew struggled to control the damage, but it was hopeless. The torpedoes had done their job. At 2:23 p.m., Yamato capsized. The forward magazines exploded. The blast was so massive it was seen 100 miles away. A mushroom cloud rose thousands of feet into the air. 3,055 men died. Aircraft shot down by all of Yamato's guns combined. 3, maybe 4. Reports vary. Aircraft shot down specifically by the 18-inch guns. Maybe 1. Here's the cost equation that ends the story. Each carrier that launched planes against Yamato cost less than Yamato's main gun battery alone. Each torpedo that killed her cost $1,000 in 1945 money. Each shell for the 18-inch guns cost $50,000 in modern equivalent value. She was killed by weapons, 1/50th the cost of her own ammunition. The age of the battleship died in those 2 hours, killed by teenagers flying planes that cost less than a single salvo. Let's do the final accounting. Japan built 2 Yamato-class battleships, Yamato and Musashi. The combined cost was equivalent to building 6 fleet carriers. 6. Those carriers could have launched and sustained operations for over 1,000 aircraft. Instead, Japan got 2 ships with guns that couldn't hit moving targets, couldn't be fueled for sustained operations, and couldn't survive air attack. The resource allocation was catastrophic. Every yen spent on Yamato was a yen not spent on carriers. And Japan lost the carrier war at Midway in June 1942. They needed more carriers desperately, better trained pilots, more aircraft. They built bigger battleships instead. 4 years of war, 360 shells fired in anger at enemy ships, 0 confirmed kills of significant targets, no strategic objectives achieved, no battles influenced, nothing. Compare that to American battleships with smaller 16-inch guns. They provided essential shore bombardment for every major Pacific invasion. They won surface engagements. They protected carrier task forces. They accomplished their missions. Yamato's greatest achievement was that the crew quarters were comfortable, the most expensive hotel in military history. Here's what it comes down to. Power without adaptability is just weight. Engineering magnificence without strategic vision is waste. Impressive specifications don't win wars. Results do. The Yamato was useless because it couldn't reach the battlefield. 600 tons of fuel per day meant it stayed in port. It was useless because it couldn't hit targets. 0.2% accuracy meant statistical irrelevance. It was useless because it damaged itself firing. Blast overpressure disabled its own systems. It was useless because it was fighting yesterday's war. Battleship duels didn't exist anymore. Japan's leadership chose symbolism over effectiveness, prestige over practicality, tradition over adaptation. They wanted the biggest guns, the thickest armor, the most powerful ship. They got all of that, and it changed nothing. The decisive weapon of World War II naval warfare wasn't the battleship. It was the aircraft carrier. Yamato represented obsolete doctrine built at extraordinary cost. The future of naval warfare flew at 200 miles per hour and dropped torpedoes that cost $1,000 each. The mathematics were always against them. 2,000 fighters not built. Fuel that didn't exist. Accuracy that was statistically meaningless. A service record of 0.8% combat time. A final mission that was explicit suicide. 3,000 men dead for propaganda. The final irony is perfect. Yamato was sunk by aircraft from 11 carriers. Each carrier cost less than Yamato's main battery. The ship represented everything wrong with Japanese strategic thinking in one floating, expensive package. Yamato's 18-inch guns were an engineering marvel. Truly impressive. The largest naval rifles ever built. They fired 360 times in combat across 4 years of total war. And they changed absolutely nothing. The most powerful battleship ever built proved one lesson conclusively. Power without purpose is just expensive noise before you sink. A 9-year-old American pilot in a torpedo bomber that cost less than a single 9-gun salvo ended the era of the battleship. The math never lies.